I'm putting together a journal that I can work on for a gardening journal. So I've come to my park, my local park, where I usually come hiking, and I'm off the hiking trail a ways. It's on a hillside, and I tried to find like a flat area where I can spread things out and do a little bit of work. So I'm still on the hillside, and it overlooks this ravine area, which is really pretty. So a nice peaceful spot. And that way I can look at, the trees and the leaves and just think things through and just kind of get a sense of what I want to do in this journal. And I'm just trying to really reflect like nature and kind of put a certain kind of look into the journal. And that way, when I'm planning my garden, it reminds me of things out in the forest. And that's what I like to do, is bring elements of what's out in different parks, bring it home to my backyard. And so if I think about things in that way, rather than just trying to plan things out, when I'm just looking, in my boxy backyard, it really does help me think larger or think more creatively about the kinds of things that I'm going to do in my gardens. So I've brought different things in my crafting backpack. And one thing I do is I put everything in like this type of a plastic sleeve or in a plastic bag. And that way, if rain kicks up or something, then it's primarily waterproof. So this is a digital paper collection from Polka Art Studios, and it's definitely one of my favorites. It's so pretty. So I've printed out a stack of papers, and I grabbed some of my coffee dyed papers, and I thought I would just start on a new journal here. So this is done over time. So I do tend to start with coffee dyed papers. I just take for me it's 8.5 by 11 papers, and I just fold them in half. And then I decide what other papers I'm going to add in. So sometimes I'm adding in like tracing paper or some like patterned paper, maybe envelopes, maybe some graph paper. So this one I'm keeping pretty plain. I'm just doing some different coffee dyed papers, and I just fold them in half. So this is kind of a favorite size journal that I do. I will do other sizes as well. Like my favorite size journal would be a 5x7 journal. So it would be like 7 inches tall or maybe 7.5 inches tall. And then the paper would be like 10 inches wide. And when I fold it in half, I'm getting 5-inch wide paper. But that's actually my favorite size of journal. But just for ease, a lot of times I'll take my 8.5 by 11-inch pages and just be folding them in half. And then this is the size of the journal. So I do find this kind of an easy size to write in. And it helps also with the digitals. You can see the digitals that I have printed out have a white space around them. But that's, I guess, the way I have it set to print. I'm sure I could set that to borderless printing, but I just keep it the setting that it normally is, and that way I'm just trimming off that white border. And a lot of times I'm adding that to a base paper that's already 8.5 by 11. So when I'm traveling anywhere or even just coming to the park, I do tend to bring like multiple options, because that way when I'm kind of sitting working outdoors, I probably will have a different idea here than I would if I'm sitting home at my desk. So I do try to bring a little bit of a variety, but when I do pack my bags to go to the park or something, I definitely do try to keep things to a minimum. So even though I might have brought 7 or 8 different sheets of possibilities, but that way I'm not overpacking and I don't have so much stuff that I'm kind of spreading out too much in the forest. So I have my papers, and then I have my coffee dyed papers. I also brought some papers from I have like 2 Jane Austen books, so Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion, and then I also have a Jane Eyre book. And I basically just went and bought those at Barnes & Noble because those are my favorite books. And that way when I have book pages then they're things from my favorite books. I feel like that really just kind of lifts my spirits more than something that I may not know, or like a dictionary page that says like, chores. What is chores? Something that I know is just going to make me say ugh. I would just rather have something that makes me smile, if that makes sense. So I do try to kind of limit what I'm putting into my journals to things that are uplifting to me personally, or things that maybe mean something to me personally. And I do really like these digitals because they do the same thing. They remind me of not just floral things, but kind of things that remind me of being out in the woods. So almost like weedy flowers, things that I would see blooming in a field. And sometimes you think, okay, is this a weed, or is like this an actual flower? But it doesn't really matter because it's still really pretty. So I do really like this set, and I also like that it's in purples and like mauves and pinks, and then it has, you can kind of see it's like onions and more the bulbs and wildflowers. I just think it's really pretty. So I'm definitely going to use this on this project, and I have used it on other projects, and I think I will just keep on using it. I'll just use different elements of it in all different things because it is really one of the prettiest kits I've seen as far as digitals go. And I did get this on Etsy, if you're wondering where it did come from. So right now I am picking out the color for the binding on this journal. So I had a selection of colors. I actually went to Joann's and kind of just thought, I'm going to pick out like some favorite colors, and that's what I did. And then in that same aisle, they have darning needles, and that's what I use to do the actual binding. But I do use this embroidery thread. I do that for all of my projects, so I don't use the wax linen thread, or I don't think I use anything else. I'm trying to remember, but I do obviously use elastic when I'm doing that type of a journal. But I do really like using embroidery thread, and one reason that I do like it so much is the fact that you can have such a large selection of colors that can match your project. And you'll see what I'm doing here. I am just eyeballing holes, and I like to bind my journals this way, where I'm basically just doing a large thread staple. So in the past, I would do the more traditional type bindings, and I kind of forget what that's called, maybe a pamphlet stitch or something. But honestly, I just personally didn't like it very much, and I wasn't totally sure it was holding as well as maybe other ways I could do it. So I started doing this method where I'm basically doing maybe an inch at the top and an inch at the bottom. If I had larger paper size here, I would do also one in the middle, but holding it top and bottom is pretty good. I've also done it only in the middle, like maybe take an inch in the middle and do that, and it holds pretty well. It's just maybe a little bit awkward, so it is kind of nicer to do it an inch at the top. And by an inch, I just mean the part where the thread goes in one hole, not the other hole, is an inch, or I might do a half an inch, which would be actually like maybe the size of a staple. But wherever I start the thread is where the thread tails will be. So I will do that sometimes, starting in this case like on the outside, and then other times I will start those thread tails on the inside. It just depends, because I like it both ways. I like opening a journal and seeing like thread tails in the middle of the journal, and if you do want to add like dangles to it or beads or something, that would work in the middle of a journal just as well as it does on the outside of a journal. But in this case, I'm going to have my thread tails hanging on the outside, because I probably will end up adding some dangles to it or beads or whatever else. So you can see I'm just making a small binding area here. Like this is more like a half inch, I guess. And in this case, I did use my ruler. I'm just trying to get it as uniform as I can, even though I also do some eyeballing here too. But I do like this method. I would love to know if you guys use this method at all and what you think about it. But as far as the pamphlet stitch, I would get confused. Where do I start? What do I do next? You know, that type of a thing. And I didn't necessarily like the look of it inside my journal very much, or on the outside of my journal. So this to me is just, I just like it functionally better, and maybe I like the look of it a little bit better. So here I'm just tying it in a bow, and if I can't double tie it, like if it's just not working out, then I might go back and put like a little dot of glue, and that way it, you know, I know it'll hold it. But sometimes, like in this case, I think I'm just doing like one tie of the bow, and that might be because then I can add beads and then retie it at a later time. So I'm just threading this embroidery thread through a darning needle, and the darning needles are larger and they're thicker, and then the eye is much bigger. So it is helpful for me to do that so that I can more easily thread it, even though, you know, I'm not having the easiest time threading it, but but you know, because this is multiple threads. I just keep wetting it and twisting it till I can get it through the eye of the needle. But I really like this process. I mean, I'm a quilter, so I don't mind doing some hand sewing, but I do really like this process of doing this with embroidery thread. I really just like the, you know, the fact that this thread is small and it's soft, not as, trying to think of the word for like the wax linen thread. It's just, it's kind of like a tough thread, and it's like waxed, and I just don't love the texture of it. So I do enjoy using embroidery thread. It's just a nice soft finish on it, and I'm guessing it would be a lighter weight thing. And I know, like in quilting, it's like certain things don't rub, so I'm guessing like wax linen thread, it doesn't rub that hole, so that it might last longer. But I feel like embroidery thread is sturdy enough that it, you know, I've never had it fail in a journal, and you know, I'm just using it for a certain period of time. I'm not trying to keep my little journals for 100 years or anything like that. So I do feel like this is a nice way of doing it. But what I do is I have like a baggie full of my embroidery threads, all the different colors, and I have like a little kit. So it has a pair of scissors in it, it has my pokey tool in it, and this little ruler, and then darning needles. I probably have like 6 packs of darning needles, because I just don't want to, you know, be without them one day or something. So I really do try to have some extra stuff. I might have clips in there. I guess I have a little bit of ribbon in there. So I just keep it all in this little baggie, and that way, and then I throw it in one of my drawers. But this way, if I'm going to the park or something, I can just throw it in my bag, and I have the whole kit. I don't need to worry about grabbing all the different elements, because they're already put together. And also it helps me to not overbuy embroidery floss, because, you know, otherwise I might accidentally buy like the same color 10 times or something. But this way I can see at a glance what I have. So I do tend to put things in baggies too, for 2 reasons. One, it takes up like the smallest amount of space. So even though I do like other containers and things, baggies, you can squish everything down into a really small space, and that does help just for storage in drawers. And then also if I'm putting it into a bag and I'm, you know, taking it somewhere. The other thing is it doesn't rattle around. So if I'm hiking, for some reason I don't like it when things are rattling around. So I do use a lot of little baggies. I think it really helps. So I am now, the journal is bound, so it has the binding on it, and I am now working on the closure. So the outside of this journal, which is just coffee dyed paper, the whole thing is coffee dyed paper, but the top piece here, this is, I'm going to add things to it. So this is basically the base of my cover, and I'm just going to add some seam binding And I do like this method of closing a journal, especially this type of just like a coffee dye journal. It's not thick pages, it's very thin. The cover is going to be thin, so I would say it's more like fragile kind of journal. So I take my seam binding, and if you do the closure this way, you do have to a little bit pre-plan it, because otherwise things won't be in the right spot. But I am finding my seam binding the color that I want it, and I'm adding some to the front here. So I glue about 1 inch of it back, maybe 1.5 inches, and that's enough when I'm further along the process that it will stay really sturdy and it will keep it strong, because I'm going to be tying this and untying this many times. So I do it on the front, and then here I do it on the back. So all I'm doing is adding some glue, and this is I'm going to say it's glitter glue, but let me look at the bottle. It is art glitter glue. And that doesn't mean there's glitter in it, but what it means is that I guess it's strong enough to hold glitter. So this is a nice strong glue, so I do use this glue as one of my favorites. And you can see I glued it on the front cover, and then I turned it around and I glued it on the back cover so that I can line them up. Because otherwise, if I'm eyeballing it like, oh, well, this is in the middle, and on the back, oh, this is in the middle, then they're always usually about 1/2 inch or 1 inch off. So I try to really line them up. And then so I did that first, and then I cut the lengths. And I'm leaving the lengths a little bit long so I have enough room to tie a bow when I'm ready to close the journal. So the idea here is you glue this seam binding or ribbon or whatever you want to use. You glue that down first, and I'm doing it on the outsides, and then I'm going to add some of these papers, one to the front and one to the back. And that way the seam binding is sandwiched between them, and so it gives you a nice strong bond for the ribbon or whatever you're using. And that way when you're tying it shut, it's sturdy, it's not going to rip, it's not going to rip the paper, and it's just a nice functional kind of closure, and I think it's pretty too. So now I'm going to be adding my front cover here, and on this journal I've decided, since you can kind of see these pages have like a pretty strong border around them, and I would say it's more like a vintage looking, as if it's been inked, that type of a border. So I'm going to do some distress inking around the outside with a color that's just similar. So I think I end up using, like, let's say a walnut stain or in the oxide ink. And so I'll just go ahead and ink the page, because since I'm cutting it, then you have that like white edge. So I'm just trying to get rid of that white edge. And then I've decided in this journal I'm also going to add some gold paint to give the illusion that it's like gilded edges of pages. I just think that's a nice contrast to all the, like the worn looking papers and the natural looking everything. And I think like throwing some gold in there, I think is kind of a nice contrast to that. So I basically just dip my finger in there in the paint, and then I just edge it that way. So for this project I have wet wipes close by, because I'm going to have to be wiping my fingers off, because otherwise I'm going to make a big mess. So in some of these I'm just doing like one side, some I'll do like 3 sides. It just depends on what I want to stand out. So if I don't want the one edge to stand out, then I just won't put any gold there or any distress inking there. And that way it won't stand out as much. And also with the gold, and when I do some distress inking around the edge, I I tend to get like smudges or like a big area of it in the corners, and I actually do like that. I feel like it makes it look like an older journal. And like I said, it can get a little messy, but I do bring out my dryer sometimes and like my heat tool, and I will try to dry it a certain amount. But if I put it down and I get kind of like a gold splotch somewhere, like I said, I feel like it kind of adds to it and makes it look like an older journal, so I don't mind that too much. So I am using a Ranger heat tool. I did say dryer, but it's not like a hair dryer. It is a Ranger heat tool, and I bought mine from Amazon. The thing is that it seemed like there was a European version and then the US version, so I had to be careful that I got the US version. So I hope I'm not remembering that wrong, but I just wanted to throw that out there because obviously one will work in the US, and then I guess a different version is working outside the US. So you might want to take note of that. But I love this heat tool. It works really well, and it's really soothing and quiet, and it's one of my favorite tools. So I do really enjoy doing projects where I can use this. And I can even use it if I'm working in the middle of the night. If I'm up in the middle of the night for some reason, it's not that loud, so I can still use it. Okay, so now I'm going to glue this cover on, and since it is the front cover, I'm just adding, I would say, extra glue, and then I'm adding more glue again on that closure just to make sure that that stays put. So I'm gonna just kind of like generally glue this top cover, and I'm still using the the art glitter glue, but I will just kind of generally glue it to the paper part of the cover, and then I'll go back and add some so that the edges of this are really well glued down. Because even though, like, this is a journal that I use a lot, I use a number of these little journals, and I will do that for, like, let's say I'm reading a book or I'm watching like an informational podcast or something like that. Then I will make these journals, and like there's one set of YouTubers where I will have a journal and then I will take notes in it. So I will, maybe put the different dates of their podcasts, and, like I said, if it's something informational, then I'll be taking notes, and I fill a lot of these little journals that way. So that way I can have them in like sequential order. But it's kind of fun because then I try to do a journal that tailored to the subject matter. Like one I did, it was like a faith journal, and I found a great digital from the Junk Journal Studio, and then so I made a journal just like this, and then I could just sit and take notes, and I filled it pretty quickly. I did then make another one. But that, it's kind of fun for me to do that because it's both like a hobby and then also I'm learning at the same time. So I do really like that. But these, I would call them more fragile journals because they are just paper. And like this cover is just a coffee dyed piece of paper. And then, I glue on one additional piece of paper. So it's not like a hardcover journal at all, but I do find, I throw these in my bags, I throw these in my purse, and they stay perfectly fine. Like I really haven't had issues with papers tearing or anything of the sort, but they are, this is just computer paper that I have coffee dyed, and I do have a separate video about coffee dyeing and tea dyeing, these types of papers. But I find it really nice for something that I'm actually going to use because I can get a lot of pages in these journals, and they're small, and it's practical. I can put a lot of information in these little journals. And also it's nice because then when I pull it back out again, it's like I remember making the journal, like time period wise, what was going on in my life. And then when I'm taking notes, it's just kind of like a fun, it just makes it more enjoyable, I would say. So, and like this journal, if I can use this for gardening notes for this summer, like this point in the year, basically I'm just like still weeding my yard and trying to get all the weeds out of all the different gardens. So I haven't really started forward planning for like, do I want to move things around or do I want to add some new plants? Usually I wait till I'm getting everything, weeded and trimmed and all that kind of stuff. And then I start figuring out what changes I want to make to the gardens. So, but this type of journal, I'll remember, making the journal, and then when I'm putting all the information in it, it's almost like a memory device for me, that I remember what was going on in my life when I was making this journal, and then also like the planning for my garden. It just kind of, it's like a snapshot in time. So I kind of like that. So I have picked out a Tim Holtz. I think that's a Tim Holtz. It's like I forget what they call it, but it's almost like a lock and a key for the beginning of the journal. So it's obviously not like a functional thing, but it's a decorative thing. So it looks like a keyhole metal embellishment on the front, and I'm adding brads here, and sometimes I will add like jeweled brads to these or pearl brads. And what I'm doing is I'm poking a hole through the front of the embellishment, putting a brad through it, and then I'm gluing it on the back here. So sometimes when I'm putting these metal embellishments on, I can't poke it through for some reason. Like if I'm doing a really thick journal that has like a 1/4 inch thick cardboard front or something like that, I will just glue it on. And again, I use the art glitter glue, and my embellishments have stayed on well with that art glitter glue. It's a pretty strong glue. And then I will just add like the flat back jewels or flat back pearls or something like that, and I will just glue them on, and that's been working for me lately, to be able to put on some heavy metal embellishments. And then if they have like the holes but I can't use a brad, then I just add like a jewel to it or something, and that's been working really well. So been liking that, because some of my different journals I will put like a book plate on it, like a metal embellishment, and then I will put the month and the year, or I tend to do things like for a season. So let's say it's spring 2024, then I will put the date on it like that. And that's really nice if you're keeping that kind of a thing. Pretty easy, obviously, quickly to see what that's for. So what I'm doing now is I have some of these edges inked, and then I'm going back and I'm adding that gold paint to the edges, just for something nice, because some books that I get at Barnes & Noble or something that I've had as a child, they have like those gilded edges, and I just always like that look. I think it's really cool. And on this journal, I'm just adding it to the longer side. I'm not doing top and bottom. I'm just adding it to these longer sides. And I'm just adding some paint. And again, if it splotches, because when I'm doing it with my finger, sometimes it splotches, and I figure that just makes it look like an older book. But just adding some of the gold paint, and then I'm doing a few at a time with my fingers in between, and then I'll just get out my heat gun and try to dry it. And truthfully, some of this is still wet when I'm working, and it could go on to the next page or something, but I still think it looks kind of cool, so I don't worry about that too much. And I'll go through all these pages. I know some of them I did with distress ink, and some I did with gilding. I don't know if I did gold paint on every single page. I was trying to be a little bit haphazard about it, just so it had like some variation. But I like this contrast between a bright gold paint. This is actually a pretty bright gold paint. I think this is an Americana paint. But the contrast between the paint and then like an old coffee dyed page, I think is pretty nice looking. And drying it with a heat gun, it goes pretty quickly. And like that is my favorite coffee dyed page. I don't know what was going on there. Sometimes I think printer paper, because this is, you know, just the 20-pound paper or whatever. But sometimes the paper might be a little off, and then it's great because it dyes like in all these interesting things going on there. So. And you can see I put that page in the middle because it's probably my favorite page. So. And sometimes they'll even find like numbers like engraved in the paper, and like all of a sudden a number will pop out when you coffee dye it. I think that's kind of cool. And you could probably, you know, do 2 or 3 pages like this at once. Like I'm doing every individual page, but you could probably take a chunk of pages and just put the gold paint on them all at once if you wanted to try that. So doing this process makes me wonder if I could gold emboss the edge of a page. I'm not sure I would try like an entire journal at once, because that is probably a much more involved process. But I might try that maybe on a front and back cover of a journal and just see like how that would work. Because I do have, you know, obviously they have embossing pens, and I do have one of those. Or I could just like put the ink pad on the edge with embossing ink and then try to do embossing powder on the very edge. So I have not seen anyone do that, although I'm sure people have. I just haven't seen it. But I would like to try that myself and just see how that looks, because that would really be a beautiful edge. And I'm not sure how long that process would take, but I think it'd be fun to experiment with that, because that would be a nice permanent feature in a journal, and that would be pretty striking. I think that would be neat. So we're almost to the end here. I think this journal might be like 10 pages, which gives you obviously 20 pages to write on, or I don't know, maybe more if you're counting each side of the page. But I feel like it's a good sized journal. And again, another thing I really like about this is, you know, in the next video, we're going to add pockets to it. So I can add pockets, which means I can add like notes, like little note papers or whatever, which I tend to do a lot of that. I can add like post-it notes, I can do whatever, and then maybe even throw a pen in there. And then I can close it by like tying it all up, and that way things aren't flying out of it. Which, you know, if I'm doing this at the park or I'm sitting at church taking church notes, then my stuff isn't going all over. I can kind of get it contained again. But I do really like doing that too. But that's why I like tying this with a bow, because you can tie it as tight or as not tight as you want. It's I think more adjustable than other kinds of closures that I do. Okay, so we've got all of these pages. It's a little bit of a process, but we've got all the pages gilded or faux gilded. And we have our closure on, which is pretty well dry at this point. And we have it bound. And then I'm just going to do back of the journal here. And it's funny because these pages are so pretty. It's like I don't even know which pages to pick. I actually did another journal in these same, not the same papers, but the same set of papers, and I just picked a different closure, but it's just, they're so pretty. Like I think I could just keep churning these things out. They are so pretty. And this is more like of a wildflower. There's more like refined flowers in there, like tulips. I'm not sure if there's roses. I would guess that there's roses, maybe peonies. But I think this is more like the wildflower look on this journal. But it is so pretty. Like I keep going on about this paper, but it is definitely one of my favorites. It's like an off-white or maybe a linen color, and it has beautiful fonts, and the flowers themselves, like all the beautiful foliage. It just has the color greens that I really like, which is, you know, like an olive green or a fern green. It's just got like all these different colors in here, so it really goes with a lot of different things, and I just really think it's pretty. So I kind of like getting these digital kits where I know I'm going to just use it for all different things. And this is definitely one of those kits. So again, just putting some gold paint on the edges. I'm going to get that dry, and then we'll glue this down. So when I go to write in a journal like this, I like to maybe find my brown pens or something like that that has more like a natural color to it. And then I feel like it goes really well with the journal itself. And, you know, sometimes I feel nervous to like start writing in a journal if I think it's super pretty. But I try to think, well, if I do something that I don't like, I think it looks sloppy, or it's something that maybe I want to cover up or whatever, I can just glue another piece of coffee dyed paper on top and probably no one would ever know. So I try to kind of push myself to just go ahead and use these journals and write in these journals, and then I can always cover it up with pictures or whatever if it's something that I don't really want to look at. So again, I'm putting the glue on pretty heavy here, and I always do put an extra heavy layer of glue on the actual closure. And then once I get this paper on, I will make sure I glue close to the edges so that those edges get stuck down, so that, you know, nothing pops them up, or like if I'm throwing it in the bag, I don't want this thing to pull back and maybe rip or something. So I do try to glue this extra layer here heavier than I normally would, so that it's just nice and sturdy. And here I use the back of my glue bottle to push things down. So, because sometimes if my hands are already sticky or they're full of paint or something like that. But I do find using the bottom of the glue bottle to like push it down. I don't know if other people do that too, but I do that a lot, because otherwise I might put things on it like a stapler or something to weight it down. But I figure I might as well just use the glue bottle itself, right? And it works. It works really well. But yeah, I really like the look of this. I can see, you know, the gold paint. It's strong enough that I can actually see it. And I just feel like this looks like an old book. I kind of have a fascination with like illuminated books, like the old medieval kind of illuminated things. So this just to me gives like a little hint of that. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will have part 2 and part 3 coming up. Thanks for watching.